Morocco, long considered one of North Africa's more stable monarchies, finds itself under growing pressure. Over the past weeks, a youth-led protest movement has surged across cities and towns, demanding sweeping reforms in education, healthcare, jobs, and government accountability. The trigger: the deaths of 8 pregnant women at a public hospital in Agadir, which protesters cite as a symptom of a failing healthcare system and misaligned government priorities. In response, King Mohammed VI addressed Parliament, pledging improvements in education, health, and employment, but made no direct reference to the protest movement itself. The tension between symbolic promises and systemic change now defines Morocco's political moment. Protests first erupted on September 27, 2025, when outrage spread over the deaths of 8 pregnant women during childbirth at a public hospital in Agadir. Many Moroccans saw this as an emblematic crisis: how a modern nation hosting grand projects like the FIFA 2030 World Cup can still fail to provide basic maternal care. That tragedy became the lightning rod for deeper grievances. A cohort of Gen Z Moroccans, disillusioned by youth unemployment, corruption, regional inequality, and underfunded public services, coalesced into a movement called Gen Z 212. Through social media platforms like TikTok, Discord, and Instagram, protest calls spread rapidly. Demonstrators chanted slogans such as "Stadiums are here, but where are hospitals?" and demanded the resignation of Moroccan Prime Minister, accusing the government of prioritizing flashy infrastructure over social welfare. Morocco's macroeconomic numbers mask deep fissures. The national unemployment rate hovers around 12.8%, but among Moroccans aged 15-24, it jumps to 35.8%. Even among university graduates, unemployment is about 19%. Many young people feel locked out of opportunity, particularly in rural and marginalized regions. In preparation for hosting global events like the 2030 World Cup, the government has poured billions into stadiums, transport, and other high-profile projects, but many Moroccans argue that health, education, rural development, and basic public services have been neglected. Protest slogans directly reference this disparity. Protests are not new in Morocco. The 2011 Arab Spring brought waves of youth-led demonstrations across the country, and in 2016-2017, the Hirak Rif movement in the Northern Rif region shook the state, demanding development, accountability, and regional justice. Those earlier movements sowed a culture of dissent and expectation among citizens about the role of protest in securing justice. On October 10, 2025, King Mohammed VI delivered his annual address to Parliament. In a speech much awaited by both the state and the streets, he affirmed that education, health, and youth employment must be priorities. "We have set as priorities the creation of jobs for young people and the concrete improvement of the education and health sectors," the monarch said. But notably, the king did not explicitly mention the youth protests or call for direct political change. He urged that national development projects and social programs should not compete. But the omission of protest-specific acknowledgement disappointed many organizers who had hoped for royal intervention. The king's speech followed signs that the state felt the political pressure. Some in government, including ministers, began urging dialogue. Simultaneously, the protest movement announced a temporary suspension of protests to reorganize and regain momentum. Though initially peaceful, nightly protests soon increased in intensity, spreading to major cities. By October 1st, clashes had turned violent. The Ministry of Interior reported more than 400 arrests, 263 injured security personnel, 23 civilians wounded, and damage to vehicles and buildings. Some reports say protesters used knives, Molotov cocktails, and vandalism. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International, have accused security forces of excessive use of force, arbitrary arrests, and violent suppression of largely peaceful demonstrations. Videos have shown defenders being dragged, vehicles ramming protesters, and arrests in civilian clothing by security agents. Among the dead, at least 2 protesters were killed near Liclia during clashes involving security forces responding to attempts to storm a gendarmerie station. Others died in earlier nights of confrontations. Protesters have pushed back, emphasizing that their fight is against the government, not security forces. The protest leadership is decentralized, Gen Z 212 operating anonymously across digital platforms with no publicly known founder. Their core demands include better public health care, especially maternal and hospital systems, improved education access and funding, job creation and alleviating youth unemployment, government accountability, dismissals of corrupt officials, judicial reform, greater citizen inclusion, rejecting further privatization of education and protecting civil liberties, including releasing detained protesters, opinion detainees. At times, they have paused protests to regroup and launch more focused mobilizations, calling for nationwide letters to the king and submitting public demands. Prime Minister Aziz, a businessman turned politician closely aligned with the monarchy, has become a focal target. Moroccans accuse him of ignoring social issues while focusing on high-profile projects. The king's decision not to directly address the protests has been interpreted by many as distance or strategic restraint. But the pressure is on. The monarchy's historical role as arbiter and guarantor of national unity is being tested. This is not just another protest. It's a youth-led revolt in a society with more than half the population under 35. Many in Gen Z have little memory of prior protests, but deep frustration with status quo. The movement's use of digital coordination sets a new template for dissent in Morocco. If the government fails to respond with substantive reforms, the protests could become sustained, decentralized, and harder to suppress. The use of force by security services, if unchecked, risks fueling more anger, fractures within security ranks, and international criticism. This moment echoes earlier episodes. The 2011 Arab Spring saw major protests under the banner of democracy, rights, and social justice across Morocco. Hirak RIF 2016-2017 showed that marginalized regions could mobilize successfully against neglect and corruption. Stethoscope Revolution 2015 was a doctor-led protest against a controversial compulsory rural service law in healthcare. Each generation of protests has chipped away at the myth of a docile monarchy, and this one may push Morocco into structural change. The king's speech laid out intentions, but many await whether real policies follow. Gen Z 212 says it is temporarily halting protests to recalibrate and strategize future phases. The government may appoint new social programs, dismiss corrupt officials, or propose legislative changes to ease discontent. But real reform requires budget reallocation, health and education reforms, and structural accountability, not just rhetoric. International observers and human rights groups are pressing for restraint, investigations of abuses, and respect for protest rights. Morocco stands at a crossroads, whether to respond to youth demands with transformative change or allow the protests to deepen fractures between state and society. The tragedy in Agadir may have been the spark, but the fire now depends on whether the powers that be act or ignore.